veganism is not a belief. The only belief that's involved in veganism is the idea that...
What is it going to take for us to get to a vegan world?
I don't know. And I think anyone who claims that they really know, I don't really know, because I think what's going to happen is that we go through history and at some point something's going to happen that we have a vegan world. But to claim to know what that is to claim to be able to tell the future. And I really don't know. I know some great people, for example, at Direct Action Everywhere, they have a 50-year plan to create animal liberation based on history, which makes a lot of sense to me. For me personally, I don't know history well enough yet. I'm always studying it to have an idea, so I have some ideas of how it could happen. But I mean, the only thing I know that it's going to take is for each and every one of us to have that strong vision to believe in it, because I know so many people don't believe in it. And they're like, I made a post the other day that was like, hey, the animals, they need liberation. That's what they need. So that's what we're going to create. Like, we don't have a choice. We don't have the choice to say like, oh, we should just give them bigger cages and get them better treatment because that's more realistic. Or we should get people to cut down on animal product consumption because that's more realistic. That doesn't matter because the animals need this to stop. So all I know is that we need a vision and we need to be committed to that vision and take action that's consistent with that vision. So I know it's going to take that. But specifically what is going to cause that I really don't know.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. That's great. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's no way to know for sure what the future is going to hold and what it's going to take. But you hit the nail right on the head. It's about that belief. It's about knowing that it's possible, because like the old adage, if you believe it, you can achieve it. All right. So next question is, what is the most ridiculous excuse you've heard someone use for eating animals?
I don't know. They're all equally ridiculous to me. But to me, like, it's not really about the specific excuse. I don't find specific excuses very ridiculous, because when people really use them as excuses, they're lies. Like, a lot of times when people say things like, oh, but plants feel pain too, or, oh, but lions eat gazelles, they're lying. They don't really mean that. They're not really saying, oh, I would go vegan, but I believe that plants feel pain, so therefore I'm not going to go vegan. They're not saying that. Really what they're saying is, well, I really don't want to hear this right now. I don't want to change, so fuck you. That's what they're saying. So, I don't know. To me, what is ridiculous is rather the fact that people would rather rationalize and not face the truth because it makes them uncomfortable, rather than changing, which is the solution. That's what I find ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. All right. So this next question is a little bit personal, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But I've just been curious as I grow in my own vegan activism. Sure. How do you fund the amazing activism you do? And is it an expensive lifestyle to be as active as you are? Like, what does it take, and kind of the costing and funding and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. A lot of people ask about that because a lot of people want to do something similar, right? So for me, I was very fortunate to get into activism at a time when I was just getting out of college. And I went to college here in the United States. I'm not a US citizen, so I'm here on a student visa. And I graduated college after 4 years. And after that, for pretty much almost an entire year, my parents were still down to support me financially. My parents supported me financially through college because I was very fortunate. I have very supportive parents. And so they did that for about a year after I graduated college, which is just ending actually. And then toward the tail end of that, I got a job. I never wanted to be a full-time activist in the sense that I wanted to be paid to do activism. I still don't want to do that. But now I have a job with Rowdy Girl Sanctuary where I make their video content, I do their social media. So that is officially my profession, so to speak. So that's how I fund my life now. That's how I fund what I do. And on top of that, a lot of people ask how I travel so much. My amazing girlfriend is a flight attendant, and through her benefits, I get to travel for free as well. So that's how I've been able to travel a lot this year. So it's nothing miraculous. It's just that. It's just now I have a job. I have this really fortunate situation where I get to travel. And also moving forward, I plan on building different streams of income so that I can fund my activism. I never just want to rely on, even though I do have a Patreon, mostly because I wanted to learn from it and see how it works. But I never want to rely on, oh, like I just do activism, I want to be paid for that because I think it's so valuable. Like if my work is really that valuable, and this I think is what's going to bring value to people, is people sometimes ask me, well, how do I become a full-time activist? Well, if you really want to be a full-time activist, your activism has to be so amazing and bring so much value to the community or to animals, or just be so incredible that it makes sense for you to be compensated for that. And until you get there, it doesn't make sense that you're compensated for that. So for me, I think I'm far from delivering enough value to the community or to saving animals for me to be compensated for my work. So for now, I'm like, okay, I have a job. I plan on building, at least start with building a business on the side that has nothing to do with, well, that's still related to activism in the sense that I still want all my activities to help animals. But, until like my personal work really reaches that level where it's just really that valuable, I don't intend on being full-time like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're very humble. I think you're a lot closer than you think. I believe in you, and I think that you'll get there and faster than you think.
And here's the thing too, like I don't need to be a full-time activist in order to help animals full-time. I think that's where there might be a little misconception where people want to be a full-time activist. They're like, how do I do this work full-time? Where it's like, for me, I don't do my activism full-time, but I help animals full-time because my job is working for a sanctuary which helps animals. And even if I didn't work for that sanctuary, I would find a profession that helps animals. I was just looking into this, and I was also talking to people who work in different animal rights organizations. And even if you look at a lot of like big animal rights organizations, they always have like job listings that you can always apply to work at one of those organizations and things like that. So there are many different ways that you can use your skill sets to help animals, and it doesn't all have to be through personal activism. So if people want to get involved full time, I would say, well, even if your activism can't be full time, you can still find a way to help animals full time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I love the way you put that. All right, so those are the 5 quick vegan questions. So thank you. You did great, and I'm glad you enjoyed those questions. So now I just want you to let us know who are you and what are you all about?
Sure. So my name is Ryuji. I go by Peas by Vegan. I think that's how people know me. It's funny because a lot of people who meet me don't even know my real name, which is totally fine. I don't expect them to. But yeah, so I go by Peas by Vegan, and I'm an animal liberation activist. Recently, I've been like shifted. I've been like, what does it even mean to be an activist? I feel like it's like, like there's this big thing in the entrepreneur community where they're like, oh, you put entrepreneur in your bio on Instagram, now you're an entrepreneur. And it's like, well, no, you're not. And for me, I'm like, well, I can put animal liberation activist in my bio, but like what does that even mean, right? I identify really closely to being a content creator because that's the majority of how I reach my audience, and the majority of my work revolves around making content for the internet. That's even why I'm filming this podcast right now, so I can make content out of it. But yeah, what I want to do is pretty obvious from this podcast and what I've been talking about, but my vision is to create a world where humans don't exploit animals and don't hurt animals completely unnecessarily. And really the big shift I want to see happen in society is a shift where we start seeing animals for who they are and not what we can take from them. And so I'm just trying a lot of different things and doing whatever I can to create that.
I think that's great, and it's great that you put it in that way where you're animal liberation activist. I don't even hear that term used quite as often, and it's also nice to point out what that really means for those people that just say, yeah, I'm an activist, and I like the analogy to entrepreneur because that's a great one. It really...
Yeah, and just real quick, I think this is important because I feel like sometimes it's easy for us to get caught up in actions that we're doing or things that we're doing. We're like, oh, I'm doing this and this and this and this. But we don't always keep the end goal in mind, or at least that for me, I didn't always keep the end goal in mind. But for me, I think that's the most important thing, to always keep that in mind, to be like, well, at the end of the day, we're doing this for animal liberation and nothing else. We're not doing this to feel good about ourselves, to, accumulate fame. Like it's kind of ironic that I talk about this being in the case that I'm growing my social media, but really, for me, when I think about every single action that I take and every single thing that I do, I'm always thinking about how does this fit within the bigger picture of creating animal liberation. And that's really how I want to push people to think about their day-to-day actions. Like the way that I think about whether to do something or not is, well, is this going to help create animal liberation or not? And like I said earlier, I can't know for sure, but using my judgment, if I do feel like this is something that would help animal liberation, then I'm going to go do it. And if not, well, just don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like it's when any kind of like successful book that you read that's teaching you about success and how to be successful, they're always talking about finding your why. Why do you do what you do? If you don't know why you do what you do, you'll never be successful. You'll never accomplish your goals. You'll never get to where you want to get to. And so it's just about really finding your why. And you talk about the end goal, which is your why. Why do we do what we do? All right, so that's great. So now the next thing I want to know from you is take it back from the beginning, before you even thought about animals being used or animal exploitation or any kind of slaughterhouse footage, or before all of this, before you even thought, hey, this might be something wrong to be doing. Maybe I should look into this. How did it all happen? Why did you go vegan and decide to do this?
I love my story because literally before I became vegan, I didn't even know that veganism existed. I had no idea. That's how far removed I was from it. I never even considered ever becoming vegetarian, even less vegan. Like I didn't even know what it was. So that's how far away I was from it. The way it happens is it happens in a journey of self-discovery, of self-actualization, and of education, really. Because what happened is that pretty much as a young teenager, I was a pretty miserable kid. I was a very unhappy, just high school student. I remember going to school and realizing one day that I literally hadn't smiled or laughed for like months probably. And in my mind, I was like, I don't even really know if I want to be happy right now. And I remember consciously thinking that. And then through some very fortunate circumstances, I got acquainted to different people on the internet who taught me different things. And the main gist of what I learned is that, hey, if I want to take control of my life, I can. But what it's going to take is it's going to take me putting in the work, becoming educated, and basically stepping up and being like, hey, I'm going to take control of my life. So I started doing that. I started reading a lot of books. And through that journey, I realized at some point, after reading a lot of personal development books and psychology books and things like that, that I wanted to expand what I learned about. So I wanted to learn about history. So I picked up this history book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, which to this day I think is one of the most thought-provoking books I've ever read. And in that book, the author talks about history through the point of view of many different big sweeping movements, things like the agricultural revolution, things like feudalism or monarchy or religion or imperialism or capitalism. And so it's a really interesting book, and he really talks about history from a point of view that you wouldn't really think about, So everything is about really giving another perspective to things. And so around maybe page 200 or 300, he talks about the modern animal agriculture industry. And he listed out a few standard practices. I don't remember exactly what the book said, but I remember in particular, there's this one photo of inside a hatchery. And for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, inside hatcheries for egg-laying hens, every single male chick who's born is killed on their first day of life. The most common way that it's done, and which is considered humane and legal and standard practice, is they're grown up alive in this giant macerator. And that really shocked me that we treated animals in this way for us to eat food. And he was talking about how we breed animals in the billions just for us to eat them, just for us to use and kill them. And I thought to myself, well, this is horrible. And then he capped off that section by saying, the reason that we contribute to this is not because we're bad people. It's not because we wake up and we're like, what I'm gonna do today? I wanna eat a baby pig who died screaming for their life, fighting for their life. No one wakes up thinking that. All we do is we wake up and we're like, hey, I just wanna eat some bacon, right? And he said that we're very removed from the process, and also we're indifferent. And he said that that's what happens to people when we're put in a system where the name of the game right now through capitalism is half the people, or not say the minority of people, I can't remember how he said it, but some people are told make stuff and sell it, and the rest of us are told buy it. And when that's the point of the system, and he's not even necessarily, it's not an anti-capitalist thing per se, where he's not saying that it's an evil system, even though you could argue it that way. What he was saying is that that's just what happens, and then things like ethics sometimes get thrown out the window. Because when you're able to have an exchange of goods, well, ethics is not always relevant to that. And I read that and I was like, wow. And it reminded me of this section 200 pages earlier in the book where he was talking about slavery. And he was saying, now we think about slavery as something that's unthinkable in most of the world, right? It's completely out of our paradigm, because we're like, how could we have used other human beings as property? That's an insane idea to think about. But what he was saying is that people who supported slavery, and what was relevant to that moment was being a consumer. Right? Say you're in England and you're just eating a cookie, and that cookie has sugar in it. You're not thinking, the sugar came from slavery, so I shouldn't eat this cookie. You're just thinking, man, this is a nice ass cookie, like let me fucking eat this cookie. And so basically what he was saying is that it's the same thing now. You eat a cookie now, you don't realize that the eggs in that cookie came from a place where all the male chicks were killed, where all the hens that created those eggs suffered and ultimately was sent to a slaughterhouse. You're not thinking that, you're just like, this is a really good cookie. And I really related to that, because I'm like, that's literally how I lived my life for the first 20 years. And I realized that if now I think that slavery is fucked up, there's no way to support it, to say that it's right, and that if I went back in time I wouldn't support it, then I can't support animal agriculture now, because they're different issues completely, but the fact that they're wrong is the same thing, and the way that they're normalized in society is very, very similar. And I was like, I gotta stop. And I was at a time where I was in Paris. I was just about to go back to Los Angeles for my second semester of college. And I was like, when I come back, I'm gonna stop consuming those products. So I came back and I was like, okay, I guess I don't eat meat anymore. And I started telling my friends, I was like, hey, I don't eat meat anymore. I don't drink milk. And one of my friends, I remember, he was like, so are you vegan or are you vegetarian? And I didn't even know, because I didn't know the word. All I knew was that this was wrong and I needed to stop supporting it. That's all I knew. And I was like, I don't know. So I had to look it up. I went on Google and I was like, difference between vegan and vegetarian. And I found this article that defined veganism as, veganism is a lifestyle where we refuse to partake in anything that hurts animals as far as practically possible. And I saw that and I was like, oh, that's me. That's the one that makes sense. And that's when, I became vegan. And I really want to highlight a couple different things here. For me, I think the reason that I became vegan straight away after learning about the information is specifically because I was at a place in my life where I was open to receiving that information. And that didn't come randomly, but that came, like I said earlier, because I was in this journey of self-actualization, of finding happiness for myself. I realized that all these different things, whether it be inner success, happiness, being present, being joyful, or even my outer circumstances, having the right people around me, having the life that I want. These are all things I can control. And because I understood that I can control those and I was actively working on that, I was very open to receiving new information. I was very open to changing, because I realized that in order for me to have the life that I want, no matter what that is, I at least have to be open to change. That's why when I learned that information, I was straight away ready to change. Like, I never had those moments like a lot of other people do where I had excuses for it. I never tried to make excuses. For me, I was like, this is wrong, I gotta stop supporting it. It was that simple, because that is how simple our message is. But again, that happened because I was at a place in my life where, I was good with myself. Like, so I had this space and the open-mindedness to care about that. And secondly, the thing I want to say is that that story makes it seem like I became vegan for the way that animals were treated, which is absolutely the reason why I became vegan in the first place, right? And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. That's why slaughterhouse footage changes a lot of people, because you're like, man, these animals are treated so horribly. But then very quickly, I realized through researching that the real issue is not how we do it, but that we do it in the first place. When you really take a step back, even though that's completely out of the mainstream paradigm, because we see eating animals and animal products as so normal, when you really peel it back, you'll see that what we're doing is we're breeding innocent animals into existence for the sole purpose of using them and then killing them. And that's the definition of exploitation. The question we gotta ask ourselves is, would we want to be in their position? If we want to see if something is right or wrong, what we gotta do is we gotta put ourselves in that position and see if, would I like it done to me? And when I thought about it that way, I was like, I would never want to be used for food. I don't want to be bred into the world knowing that I'm going to be killed, or knowing that my reproductive system is going to be used and then be killed. And it doesn't matter how it's done, even if it's grass-fed or free range. I'm like, I don't want to be bred and then live in a mansion just so that when I'm 3 years old, which is about the age at which animals are killed, it's really, really young, just when I'm 3 years old, I don't want to be sent to a slaughterhouse so someone can kill me. And it doesn't even matter at that point if I'm euthanized. It's like, I just don't want that to happen, period, end of story. That's wrong. And if that would be wrong done to me, then it's wrong done to others as well. And there is no way that I can justify putting others in that position. And very, very quickly, I saw that even though animals are different from us, they have all the things that matter. And the ways that matter, we're all the same. They're sentient beings who have feelings, who have personalities, who want to live, and who can suffer. And as long as they have that, then the way that they suffer is the same way that I suffer. If they go through a slaughterhouse, when they get their throat slit, is the same thing if I get my throat slit. When they're being exploited, is the same thing. And so there's just absolutely no way that you can justify it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And that's a very powerful story about why you went vegan and how it relates to the animals. And I love the story that you talked about Sapiens. I have that book on my list. It's on my list. I plan to read it, and you inspired me to really probably take that one on next, because it wasn't on my next list, but it might have shot up a few gaps.
And fun fact about that book, like the author, I didn't know this, but after I read it and I became vegan thanks to that book, I was like, man, I hope the author is vegan, and I had no idea. And it was only 2 years later that I was talking to a friend of mine who heard a podcast with that author and told me, hey, that guy's actually vegan. And I was like, that's amazing. And then I watched a few videos and I found out that he became vegan as a result of doing research for that book, which is really funny, which makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've even heard the researchers on the Oxford study for the environmental changes, like some of the lead researchers on that went vegan because of the research they found about animal agriculture and the effects on climate change. But there was something else that you said that I really liked, and I think it really resonated with me the most, and hopefully it'll resonate with a lot of people that are open-minded, is when you said you were ready and you accepted it and you didn't make excuses because you were open-minded. And the reason why that's important to me is because that's exactly what happened to me when I decided to go vegan. And I never thought about it that clearly until recently, when I was on my very first podcast and I was talking about my story. I was sharing my story, and I realized the reason why I went vegan isn't necessarily because I watched this one documentary. That was part of it. It was because before that I was open-minded because my dad had passed away and I was soul searching. I was on a self-analyzation journey of who am I and what do I want to do and what am I doing in this life, and I was open to learning. And someone recommended me to watch What the Health, and then it snowballed from there. And so I say that it was health first, but it was really open-mindedness first. So it's a question of what's the best way to communicate to people to shift their mind. It's almost what's the best way to get them to an open-minded place.
Yeah, no, I think, one thing that we got to realize about veganism that's super related to what you just said is that sometimes people think that veganism is a cult or a religion or a belief. Let's put it like that, a belief, right? And I always clarify when people say that, because veganism is not a belief. The only belief that's involved in veganism is the idea that hurting others is wrong, or that causing unnecessary harm is wrong, or that killing is wrong. That is, I guess you could say that that's a belief, but everything else about veganism is based on facts and science. The fact that animals suffer in animal agriculture, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. The fact that animals suffer when they get their throat slit in a slaughterhouse, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. But what I think people don't realize is that veganism, for me, it's not like this. I guess it is a choice that I made, because in practice we do have the choice to be vegan or not. But really, when I think about it from an ethical perspective, it's not really a choice that I made. It is rather that I just saw that something was wrong, and I was like, because this thing is wrong, I don't understand this thing where people are like, yeah, I see that what we do to animals is wrong, but they wouldn't take part in the solution, which is at least stop contributing to it. Because that's the other thing too about veganism, is that it seems in society, because it's so extreme, right, compared to what most people do, it seems extreme. But when you think about it from a logical perspective, it's the absolute least that we can do. Because people don't understand that what animals go through in animal agriculture is not a little bit bad. We're not saying like, oh, they're a little bit uncomfortable. It is the worst thing in the world. They're being bred into the world to be killed in slaughterhouses. Every single animal that goes through animal agriculture, whether it be in the meats, dairy, egg industries, they all end up in a slaughterhouse. A slaughterhouse is arguably the most violent place in the world. It's a building designed to kill in very violent ways. Like, we're slitting the throats of animals. That's no joke. Imagine getting your throat slit. That is insane. That is one of the worst ways you could die. I mean, there are many horrible ways you can die, right? But you would never want to do that. And that's what we're doing to animals. Like, I can't, the best way I would put it is that I don't think we can relate to the scale and the degree to which animals suffer and are exploited in animal agriculture, because it's really, it's really that bad. So when we see that that's happening, the least we can do is not take part in the violence, right? It's very similar to say, if you see someone in the streets kicking a dog, then most people, at least in their minds, would think that they would go help the dog to try to stop the violence, right? Or they would get people around them to help them so they can go stop the violence. That's what people would do. Well, veganism is not even that. Veganism is literally seeing the person kick the dog in the face and then walking by without helping the person kick the dog, because in our world, when we are born, by default, we're on the side of the person kicking the dog. Except if kicking dogs, we're killing cows, chickens, pigs, turkeys, goats, fish, etc., etc. Right? So being vegan is just like, hey, you see that that's wrong, and then you take a step back. You're not even stopping. It's literally the least you can do. It's literally just not taking part in the violence. And so for me, it just blows my mind that, because a lot of people know now, or at least deep down inside, that when we eat animal products, there's something wrong here. Like, they know that animals suffer, that at least they know that they're not treated well. They might not have thought that this is inherently wrong, but at least like somewhere deep down inside, they're like, they feel a little bit uncomfortable about it, right? So to me, what blows my mind is how people would choose to try to come to terms with those feelings and repress those feelings and forget about it, rather than be like, hey, maybe this is wrong. Maybe I can be part of the solution. Because to me, that was such an obvious step.
Yeah, great. I agree. It's definitely a moral baseline that we need to live our lives by. We need to continue to educate people and to spread the awareness onto why this is a moral obligation and why going vegan is the least we could do. And I know it's a famously quoted by that vegan couple, which we all love. Yep. And so I want to ask you, what do you do for the animals? How do you speak up for them? And why is it important that others do the same if they agree that this is wrong and we have to do something about it?
Yeah, so the reason it's important to speak up for animals is, like I said, by becoming vegan, all we're doing is not contributing to the violence. We're not doing anything to stop the violence. Like, if someone is kicking a dog in the streets and we walk by without stopping the violence, that person is still kicking the dog. Like I didn't take part in it, great, but the violence is still continuing. So if you want to stop the violence, which I think for a lot of us is the reason that we became vegan in the first place, right? Because we're told this story that, well, we vote with our dollar. By telling these industries that we won't buy those products, we're decreasing demand, which is also true to a certain degree. I honestly, from what I understand of how history has worked in the past, I don't think that's what's going to lead to animal liberation. Although it is important, this is not a thing to let people off the hook and be like, oh, you don't have to be vegan. Like, of course you have to, but I don't think that's nearly enough to create the change that animals need. And for sure, it's not happening fast enough for the animals, right? Because the animals need it now. That's why we say, when we chant in marches and stuff, we say, what do we want? Animal liberation. When do we want it? Now. Because we want it now, but really it's because the animals need it now. Like, they just want to be free now. So that being the case, that's why it's important to speak up, because once you're doing something to help the cause, then all of a sudden you're stepping in and you're trying to stop that person from kicking the dog. Right? What I do personally is I do it a lot through making social media content. I think that's the main vehicle through which I do it. I used to say that I do all these other things, like I go to slaughterhouses, do vigils, I do outreach, etc., etc. But really, I think where I've had the most impact by far is by creating social media content. And the way that I've done that so far is I've just experimented with a lot of things. I think I'm still learning a lot. I'm still trying a lot of new things. I have a lot of new ideas that I want to try out. And again, everything I do is linked to the end goal of animal liberation. And for me, where I'm at now is I'm trying to educate as many people as possible. And basically, I realized that our message is extremely simple. Our message is just, hey, we are by default hurting animals. Let's stop hurting animals. And that being the case, I realized that if I'm able to get this message out to as many qualified leads as possible, so people who might be open to hearing that message, then that's how I think I will get the maximum number of people to become vegan. The way that I'm thinking about it now is I think that one of the most powerful things that we can show people is footage of what actually happens to those animals. I know that a lot of people have been changed by that. For me, in my journey, when I went down that rabbit hole of research that we all go through when we become vegan, that's one of the major things that shifted my perspective, was not just reading about what happens to animals, but seeing it firsthand, right? Because like I said, it's just so bad what happens to animals. I don't think that words can describe that or convey that. Because even if I describe it super accurately, what happens to animals, I don't think that that creates a picture in people's minds of how bad it really is. Because what happens to animals in farms and slaughterhouses is just so far outside our realm of imagination. So for me, now I'm thinking about how can I get the maximum number of people to see slaughterhouse footage. And so the way I want to do that through social media is I want to look at it almost like a funnel. Like in businesses, they have funnels where they have different parts of the funnels, right? They have lead generation, lead conversion, and lead retention. So the way I look at it is I want to put out a lot of content out there that, is very accessible to a lot of people, that a lot of people can watch, that then leads them to want to do more research or to watch what happens to animals. And I want to create easy avenues through which people can do that. So that's how I'm kind of thinking about it now. But what I think is important about this story is how, even as I'm doing social media, even as I'm making videos, I'm always trying to make better, more effective content. I'm always thinking about how it can evolve. I think this is one of the things that I've seen massively not here in activist culture, so to speak, because I think we're not held accountable by anyone. For example, if you play a sport or you're running a business, then you have to improve because otherwise you're going to be outcompeted by others, right? If like your sports team doesn't train and actively tries to become better, then you're going to lose tournaments. Or if you don't actively build your business and become better, acquire new skills, well, then your business is just going to die. But in activism, if we don't evolve as activists, nothing happens because we still get a pat on the back by everyone else, and everyone else is still like, "Oh, that's so great! I'm so happy for everything you do for the animals," right? And so, for me, I'm like, I love that because it's very supportive, but at the same time, I hate that because it creates very little incentive for us to evolve as activists. For me, to this day and forever, I'm always thinking, how can I make my activism better and more effective? And not just like in these small ways, like I'm very aggressively tackling this. I'm very aggressively learning from others in many different fields that are gonna help me become better at activism. Like some people compliment my outreach, and I'm like, you don't understand that my outreach is a product of me studying social interactions and people for the past, I think 7 years of my life now at this point, or maybe even more. I very aggressively studied this by reading a lot of books, having mentors, attending programs, courses, trainings, observing, doing some deep reflection. I mean, this is some like real work I put into understanding this, and into everything I do, I put in real tangible work. It's like I do so much research on understanding, for example, just on social media, understanding how content works. Like it's not an accident that my platform has grown or that people like my content. I've created that because I've so aggressively tried to understand what works, how can I make my content better, etc., etc. That now it worked, right? So that's definitely something that I want to inject into activist culture, where I think in all facets, whether it is we do outreach, whether we make social media content, whether we do protests, like whatever it is that we do, there's always room for us to grow and improve. And I think that's something that we should pursue much more actively and also very aggressively.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Once I started learning and reading and opening my mind and learning new skills and seeing how can I be a better activist. First it was, how do I get active and what can I do? Then it was like, how do I get better? How do I improve? How do my skills get improved? And I want to give you a lot of props, because your Instagram TV videos, your IGTV videos are something that inspired me to create mine in a very similar fashion.
That's amazing.
I love.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Really, seriously, I think you're like, I put my first like IGTV video where I did the style where you have the title at top. That's like a catchy kind of eye catcher, and then you have the video, of course, and then you have the subtitles, and you have it structured in a certain way where it fits with all the formatting. That first one I remember putting inspired by Peace by Vegan. Maybe if you remember that post that I had posted, one of my first ones where I will pull it from this podcast and then upload it. But of course, there's other ways and other videos, like the oranges from podcasts and stuff like that.
No, I'm super glad you brought that up, because a lot of people hit me up with the intent of starting videos. They're like, hey, I want to start making videos. I think this is awesome. How do I go about it? And I always tell people, you just got to start, because when you start, you're going to suck. And, I sucked when I started. Like a lot of people don't know that before I did Peas by Vegan, I've been making videos for 10 years before that. That's why I have an unfair advantage. But even if you don't have that, like you got to start. Like for the first 5 years that I made videos, my videos sucked, So you got to go through that. But what happens is that I tell people this, and people understand. But then I go on their profile like 3 months later, and they haven't done anything. This is super common. And so I'm really glad that you started doing this, because, man, I'm just like, dude, like people gotta be just. It doesn't have to be videos necessarily, but anything it is that people want to start. Let's talk specifically within activism. If there's anything that you want to start, then you should do it. And you should understand that the first time you do it is going to be the worst time you do it. Like people make this big deal out of the first time of everything. Like for me, I even remember like I wanted my first video to be perfect. And I'm like, now I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? Dude, it's like everything. It's like losing your virginity. The first time you have sex is like the worst. It's super awkward because you don't know what you're doing. And it's the same thing with anything. Right? So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind and just start and then move forward.
Yeah, and you never know what'll happen. You never know how people receive it. You never know how many people you're going to influence. What if that one video that you make that sucks is seen by one person, and that one person becomes an influencer that influences millions of people? You never know, like, that impact that it's going to make. And I was looking specifically at your IGTV videos, and I remember I was scrolling down and I was interested at what point did you grow and what point did you explode. And it was so interesting to see like the number of videos, the number of views that you had at the beginning of your videos on IGTV. And then all of a sudden you hit a point where you were at like 8,000, 7,000, 10,000, and it was like 15, 20, 50, and it just grew like super fast. And what I learned from that is that this, of course, takes time. Like anything, it takes time. It's about consistency. It's about continuing to evolve. It's about continuing to get better. And it's about producing the best content that you think is going to be received the best, and hopefully that's shareable, that it says this is the best value. What people forget a lot is that the reason why most videos are successful in general is because it produces the most amount of value. If it's great value, people are going to want it, and people are going to want to share it. And you got to be thinking of the person that's watching it. Of course, we're thinking of the animals, and it's very easy to think about the animals. But before the animals, there's a middleman. It's that person that's watching the video that's going to make a decision what they're going to do at the end of the day with the information. Like the information they receive from you or my video or anybody's video, right? It has to go through that person before they can help any animals. So I think it's interesting to think, what value do you bring to that person? It could be a variety of types of ways that we could be valuable, for sure.
No, absolutely. I mean, I always think about exactly who like. This is just like a quick side note, but I think it applies to all forms of activism. I guess especially outreach, is that I'm always very conscious of who I'm speaking to. And what I mean by that is I feel like specifically on social media, there is this overwhelming tone where the way that people produce animal rights content is content to respond to trolls or haters. They're like, I know you say that plants feel pain, but this. Like that's kind of like the tone of it. And for me, I never wanted to fall into that, because for the most part, what I found is that those people are what you would call unqualified leads. They're not open-minded. I know that even though those people may seem like there are a lot of them because they're really loud, they're not necessarily, I mean, they might be the majority, I have no idea, but I don't think they're the majority. I just think that they're the loudest. Next to them, there's so many people who are actually open-minded and independent thinkers and critical thinkers who are open to receiving that message if you just laid it out in a very simple way. You know, the way that I think that Gary Yourofsky, for example, his speech has so many people became vegan because of his speech. You know, after really watching it and studying it, I think that the reason that happened is, I don't think it's miraculous, even though he's an incredible speaker. Like, Gary Yourofsky is amazing. But I simply think that it's just because he laid out the message very honestly in a very straightforward way, like no BS, and then it just got distributed to millions of people. And of course, among these millions of people, there is going to be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, I don't know, who are open-minded to receiving the message. And because he said it in such a clear way, where he was like, hey, this is what's happening, this is what you have to do, it's not a choice, it's about the animals, you gotta think about it this way, well, then people change because he just put it like just really clearly, you know. And so for me, that's what I try to do, where I'm speaking to the person who already cares, who is already open-minded, who is already a critical thinker. I might push them a little bit to bring that out of them, to be like, hey, maybe you want to think critically, maybe you want to see this for yourself now. But then besides that, I always lay out my message in a way that's very clear, concise, honest, and simple, because you know, that's just what it is. And so I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, because otherwise we can get trapped in this thing where we don't really know who we're talking to. It's just like almost we're posting to vent anger or something. And although that could work, I mean, like, I don't know, like, I'm not as arrogant to claim to know what works, but I think we at least got to be conscious of that so we can think about it and be like, hey, what am I doing now? Am I actually doing something that's intentional because I see a certain result coming from it? Or am I just posting this because I feel angry and I just want to get it out?
Yeah, that's a credible point. I love that, and I haven't heard it been put quite that way. So I love that. That's great information. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there's any really one big thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, or one big thing that you've already said that you don't want people to forget.
The one thing that I want everyone to know and remember is what happens to animals. For us to eat food, for us to clothe ourselves, the way that humans exploit animals is so bad, and we cause them so much suffering, that it's really beyond the scope of our imagination. I really want people to pause and think about this, and if you haven't seen this for yourself, I urge you to go watch this for yourself. A great place to start is the film Dominion. You can watch it on YouTube, but any place you go, try looking up what happens inside a slaughterhouse. Try looking up what happens inside a farm, and then think, would you like to be in that position? We gotta understand that even though animals are very different from us, in all the ways that matter, they're exactly the same as us. They have feelings, they have personalities, they feel, they suffer the exact same way that we do. So we gotta think, would I want to be in their position? Look at all the different industries. Do I want to be an egg-laying hen? Do I want to be an egg-laying hen in a so-called free-range facility, where it's the same thing, I'm just gonna be slaughtered at the end? Do I want to be a pig in a farm? Do I want to be a cow in a farm? Do I want to be killed in a slaughterhouse? If the answers to those questions are no, then we got to recognize that we can't put animals in that position either.
That's great. I love that. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's beyond words. It's hard to describe. And when you were talking about how seeing it in person is so much different than just reading about it or even watching a video. I mean, the first time I filmed slaughterhouse footage in Bali, I filmed pig slaughter and a halal cow slaughter. I pretended to be a meat inspector because I live in Kuwait. So I said I needed halal meat, and I had a Kuwait civil ID. So I was able to get inside the slaughterhouse and pretty much film anything that I wanted at every angle. And so the thing that stuck out with me the most, that is nothing you could read or really understand unless you see it, was the screams. It was the screams of the pigs. Just the screaming of the pigs from being electrocuted to be stunned before they're hung upside down and they have their throat slashed. That was the worst part, seeing a pig that it looked like his legs were broken. His back legs were broken. And just seeing the slaughterhouse worker beating him to walk when his legs don't even work. And he just beat him until he finally made it to be electrocuted, to be hung upside down. And those screams still haunt me to this day, but they also motivate me and push me to fight harder. And I don't want those screams. I don't want those deaths. I don't want that footage really to go in vain. And I don't want their lives to be wasted. I want them to be a purpose, that they use those lives to help spread to others, to hopefully help end this. So I'm with you. I know that we do different avenues slightly, but really we do the same thing. We're content creators. You're absolutely right. I create content. You create content. The content is in the best interest of the animals and helping to end this. So I love that. So to end this, where can people find you? People love what you're doing. They want to see your story. They want to see your journey, and they want to follow you. Where can they find you?
I mean, you can find me on all social media platforms. I've created an account on pretty much all of them. They're all Peas by Vegan. The main place I post on Instagram, but I'm gonna work more aggressively on YouTube videos that I'm very excited about, that I think are gonna tell the story of these animals in a new way. I'm always looking for new ways to package what happens to animals and new ways to get people, like you said, to become open-minded to the idea of receiving this information in the first place. So I'm very excited about what I'm gonna work on my YouTube channel. So definitely go subscribe if you're not already, or if you want to, I mean, up to you, but that's where you can find me.